I'm live and you're live. Hello, I'm trying to remember. Kwahu, remind me what I should call you. Uh, um, I- I'll start with something that I think relates to what you've mentioned in recent comments. Um, Early on in this research, I was going to evolutionary psychology conferences, and I was finding a new niche for myself as a Borscht Belt Buddhist biologist. As I already was drawn to comedy or wit as a way of dealing with things, but I also was drawn to Buddhism back then more than now. Um, and I was finding a lot of interesting ideas in evolutionary biology. So I was going to do a presentation there, and before the presentation, the lunch before the presentation, we're all sitting in the cafeteria. This is a Human Behavior and Evolution Society conference, academic conference, and someone at the table asked me, "What are you going to present on?" And I get into my whole enthusiastic tunnel vision monologue reverie about what I'm about to present, and this one guy sitting at the table says, "Yeah, but what does what you're saying have to do? What can it add to understanding my pain? Because I have horrible back pain." And they dropped the conversation shifted to him and him just talking about the pain he's in. And I realized something in that moment about the consolations of philosophy. Hello, Michael. Nice to see you. I realized something about the consolations of philosophy, which is they can be really useful, mostly for psychological pain. But physical pain is so damn convincing. It's so intense and so convincing that there are limits to what the consolation of philosophy. And ever since that, I've kept that in mind. I do this work. We talked about. I mentioned this in a response to your comment, Kwahu, which is yeah. There's a limit to this stuff. I wish it could solve everything. There are philosophies that do attempt to solace everything. What would you find more important, losing your ability to retain new information or having nothing and nobody to communicate with? Um, that relates. It actually relates to where I wanted to go. So I'm going to get there in just a second. But first of all, I wanted to say hats off to anybody who is in physical pain. I can only imagine. And I mean that literally. That is because I'm not in physical pain right now. And because I know that physical pain is unimaginably difficult, um, because it's so damn convincing. Feelings evolve to be convincing. Um, that I just hats off. I can only imagine. I cannot do more than that. I have to admit to my limits at understanding physical pain. I've had it. I burned the hell out of my feet in Guatemala in 1980. I don't remember the pain. That's an interesting thing about pain, is when it's gone, there's a way in which we do forget it. And this is maybe a link to what we're talking about, losing an ability to retain new information. Um, uh, but there's something I just have to defer to it. It's its own difficult situation. And I do wonder how I'll do if I ever get into not only chronic pain, but interminable pain. That it's the kind of pain you get into before, and there's no remedy for the rest of your life. Um, so, what would you find more in? I think what you mean is perhaps intolerable, not losing your ability to retain our information or having nothing and nobody to communicate with. Thank you for that. Yeah, like dementia. Yeah. Um, I discovered two new words today, and they added to my list of phobias. The word that got that worked for me. I just got back from a walk with Terry Deacon, my research colleague of 30 years. Those walks are a total joy to me, and it's always the retaining of new information, including this new term, kenophobia. Keno is absence. It's someone who's kenophobic has a fear of empty rooms. And and there's a way. Hey, good to see you, Jeff. Uh, so kenophobia is a fear of empty rooms. It ties in with autophobia. That is, it's also been on my mind. This new term, I'm not just collecting phobias. They're all connected up here for me. Uh, Isoptrophobia, took me a while to learn to say that one. That's fear of mirrors. That's why I did the thumbnail for this one as Dracula. I'm paying attention to fear of mirrors. Autophobia, I mentioned before, and then also cephalophobia, which is fear of decay, which relates also to dementia. The failure of your capacity to learn new information. Now, which would be more intolerable? I think that there is bliss in failure to retain new information. I think that's some of what's going on with Trumpists. There is a dream of happily ever after, where you don't have to learn anything else, that you don't need to retain new information. There's a kind of bliss. When we think about heaven or happily ever after, it's usually nothing left to learn. I think that the freedom that Trumpists and other absolutists bellow for is freedom from ever having to learn anything new. And it's often tied, or I'd say the epidemic we're dealing with these days is, it's funny, I keep on looking down at the text as if I'm talking to you. I'll look at the camera. That's what I'll do. Hey, Shirley, good to see you here. Um, uh, it's tied in with not being in an empty room. So think about the Trump epidemic as people who have freed themselves from ever having to learn anything ever again in a room altogether, reveling in how they've solved reality once and for all. It's the ultimate in romantic epidemics. For me, the definition of romance is the dream of happily ever after that lives in all of us and can never be met in reality. One basic reason is that we do die and we end up in complete absence. There's a wonderful poem about it. My favorite poet, I'm not saying he's the best or anything, but my favorite poet is this guy named Philip Larkin, and he wrote a poem called Aubade, which just means a morning poem, a poem that is about the morning or written in the morning. And I encourage you to look it up. It's a beautiful poem about the terrors of the absence at the end of life. And some people I know say they don't have that terror, but I think it lurks in us, that fear of the complete absence. Kenophobia, again, fear of absence. The other term I learned this morning was kenogenesis, which turns out to be a term in biology. And the fear of absence is a fundamental fascination for me because I think I am an absence. And the conversation I had with Terry this morning was all about how we have trouble dealing with this concept throughout the sciences, that actually emergence is kenogenesis. It's the emergence of new absences. When you're talking about life, the origins of life, it's the origins of the unlikelification of death. For me, the distinction between a self that is trying, or you could say a self that is making functional interpretive effort, and non-life, is that a self is that happens when you get a cluster flux that regenerates itself. And what is a cluster flux? It's, in the technical term, is a constraint. I don't like that term either, but it's because it doesn't quite get at it. We're talking about as a relative constraint. All of the possibilities that my matter could be in are contained within this cluster flux that I am. And I am busy regenerating the unlikeliness of my death. So there's unlikelying throughout nature. That is, something is possible. Lots of things are possible, and then some things are actual. Over time, with change, that's always going on. There's unlikelying. But with life, there's unlikelifying. That is, we are busy regenerating the unlikeliness of our own death. So you get into all of these problems around double negatives that really confuse people. That is, I think that what I am at core is death prevention. I am a relative constraint that channels energy into work to maintain the relative constraint I am. And you can imagine, so kenophobia would make us terrified of that kind of those absences. And so all of that is on my mind today. When we talk about emergence, we're not talking about the emergence of new matter or new energy. Matter and energy are conserved in the world. What we're talking about is the generation of new constraints, a new kind of constraint, which life is. And then with life, you get the new constraints in the form of emotions and concepts. So what we think of as presences are actually absences of alternatives. And this relates to what core concept that's just been universalized across the sciences, Shannon information theory. If I flip a coin, before I flip it, there are two possibilities, and there's uncertainty about which there's going to be. A bit of information, where we get the term bits and bytes, is from a reduction in possibilities. When you think about Darwin, he's saying the same, he's applying the same thing at a different level. He's saying, well, if you want to understand what's present, pay attention to what's absent, all of the organisms that died. And then if you look at Boltzmann, who is the guy who finally explained why there's decay in the world, he's doing the same thing. He's saying, if you look at all the possible configurations, there are going to be vastly more that are unconstrained or don't have any pattern or form to them than there are form ones. So if you think about it, if set aside the fact that we come up with the order of a deck of cards, if you shuffle a deck of cards, it's very unlikely to end up in order. So the work I do on explaining what information is, rather than just assuming it as this non-physical substance that gets poured into physical matter, which is no different from religious approaches, to explain what information is, there's first the physical change where things were possible and then some things were not. And then there's what caused the change. I'll explain this. I know it's getting a little abstract sounding. And then there's my practical use of that change. So to give you an example of how that would work, suppose I got a roommate. Their job is to turn off the heater when they wake up. They wake up after me. And I come home one day and I expected the house to be cold because of the second law of thermodynamics, because if there was heat inside the house, it would dissipate over the course of the day. And it's not cold, it's hot. And I'm thinking, okay, what was the work that was done that would generate that absence of coldness in the house? And I think either my roommate spaced out or maybe the thermostat's broken, something like that. And I would come to a conclusion, a practical conclusion. So I don't want to go too far into this, but it relates to trying to understand what information really is. There's a physical change that implies some kinds of possible work, and then there's figuring out pragmatically what that work was. Another example would be, suppose I expect that there's that the kitchen floor is clean, and I get up one day and the garbage is all strewn over the floor, and I'm pissed off at my roommate because I think maybe he did the work of knocking it over. And then I talk to my roommate and he says, no, it wasn't me. So process of elimination here. Really all I'm talking about is 3 levels of process of elimination. And then I realized that the cat door was open and a raccoon got in. So there are practical examples of this, but I won't go further with that. I will look at your questions. And one thing that I find frustrating in my work is that a lot of people think that I'm very abstract. Because I use these words that are kind of unfamiliar and they sound they're very general. Well, there is that. But I keep on trying to convince people I'm looking for a physical grounding for what I am. It's not the same as the abstractions you'll get from anyone else in the life and social sciences, where they assume information, they assume motivation, they assume that I got to explain it from the ground up and I have to do it with concepts that are unfamiliar, like the second law of thermodynamics. Most people don't think about it. Like I'm suggesting here, people don't want to think about it. Cephalophobia, fear of decay. But in a way, I'm trying to ground what the actual fuck we are. And so it always is a little disappointing when people say you're abstract. Okay. So what good does it do me to learn all that stuff I don't need to know? Good. All right. This gets back to your first point. Losing your ability to retain new information. So you'll notice that life doesn't need to understand what it's doing in order to do it. We're all kind of obsessed with ourselves and with what to try to do. But almost no one pays attention to what selves and trying actually are. So what I can say is no one needs to know this stuff. Just like I don't actually need to know anything about grammar in order to use it. As you can learn how to live intuitively. I didn't have a single class for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I went to a free school where classes were optional. No, I just completely missed those 3 years of schooling. And then caught up later. But my knowledge of grammar ain't much. But I write fluently. Cows don't need to know what they're doing in order to live. No organism needs to know what they're doing in order to live. If you're in pain or if you're busy, there is no reason you need to learn this stuff. If you got a little freedom, at least for me, what I can say is, I find for me, figuring out what the actual fuck I am is like the best way to use my discretionary time. And I fart around, I get stoned at night, I watch TV, I play music, but what a fun thing to get to do and what a rare thing to get to do, because cows can't do it and rocks can't do it and stars can't do it. They cannot try to figure out what they are, but I can. And so I'm making my guesses, that I know that I'm a member of this season's people. That is, I know that plenty of my guesses will prove wrong, or at least will be changed over time. But for me, there's a meandering, art-like, fad-like quality to how most people are figuring out what the actual fuck we are, because they're using abstractions. They're using basic abstractions like spirit, soul, motivation, information, and they're building up from that. They just assume something. And I'm saying, no, I actually got to figure out what I am. I'm assuming there's only nature. That is, I don't get to do the dualist move of saying there's a natural world and the supernatural world. That's just wild card, trump card stuff. And so to me, it's very useful to do this. It's fun and useful, but I came up with something last week in response to someone who's also part of this community somewhat. He had pitched me something from a CERN physicist about analytic idealism, that the whole world is conscious or there's metabolism everywhere. And I ended up saying, if you're selling, I ain't buying. And if you bought, I ain't prying. That is, I'm not gonna probe. If you've bought that theory, which to me is just another one of the fads, and they tend to cycle. This idea that the whole universe is alive is one of the popular ones. Another one is that there is no such thing as life. Life is not different from non-life. So we move between ghost and machine kind of versions of it, reductionism and dualism. But if you've bought it, I'm not prying. I'm not going to try to kick, I'm trying to figure out how to let go with people who aren't afraid, who don't want to go here, to just let go. Now, I don't do that about Trumpists. This was part of the video I put out, I think, yesterday. No, I am prying with them. And why? Because it matters to me. Live and let live is a breeze if you don't have to live with them or their decisions, but I have to live with their decisions. So yeah, I'm prying. I'm trying to kick the tires on what Trumpist or any kind of absolutist says. And I'm still learning there. I went to a party the other night. It was a bunch of activists. It was a party held by the founder of Move On, who loves dancing. And we were all dancing. And then I had a conversation with this activist person there. And I ran by her this idea about the moves that I make when I am prying with Trumpists. And I said, These are people who are hiding inside a spike suit of armor, and I either want to probe inside to gently reach to find the human being in there, or I want to kick the shit out of the suit of armor. And she said, no, you don't want to kick the shit out of the suit of armor. She said, you want to reach in to the suit of armor and poke the Trumpist in the eye. I thought, yeah, no, she's definitely right. In fact, I'm arguing against kicking the suit of armor, because kicking the suit of armor is trying to shame them, or trying to correct them about facts and reality, or trying to, out-moralize them. I'm not. That is kicking the armor, and you're only going to get bloodied doing that. Yes, I do view Trumpism and absolutism as bad. I have to deal with this old issue: blame the sinner or not the sin. Blame the sin, not the sinner. No, I'm trying to reach a human being, and I don't think that they're actually fundamentally different from me. And I operate on the assumption that if I were them, I'd be doing exactly what they're doing. But do I think absolutism is bad? Yes. Do I view Trumpism as a terrible example of absolutism? Yeah, I'm absolutely against absolutism. I'm fundamentally against fundamentalism. And I know that's a paradox. That's actually one of the reasons why I say it that way. That is, I live in that ironic space, where I assume that the bedrock keeps pulling the rug out from under us. But no, I do consider it bad. And not only that, I think that thinking that things are bad is stupid. That is, I have no use for you shouldn't be judgmental. And there will be lots of Trumpists, the standard absolutist move, which is to say, you just hate us, as if hating is immoral. I do not think that hating is immoral. I think that hating is inevitable. The more you love something, the more you hate its opposite. If you love your kids, you're going to hate seeing them die. If you love justice, you're going to hate injustice. So I have no problem with that. No one can shame me on that. If someone tries shaming me, that's just a spike on their armor. So I'm completely fine thinking that things are bad. And I think that absolutism is fucking terrible for a simple reason. The only rule I can find in all my work on the origins of life and the evolution of life is adapt to reality or die. And reality keeps on changing. So, yeah, no, anybody who thinks that they've solved reality once and for all and is living out their romantic fantasy of happily ever after in the real world will get us fucking killed. So, yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, I think it's hella bad. And I think that it's really worth trying to figure out how to undermine it, because it's the most ununderminable thing I know, is that when someone stops caring whether they're right or wrong, they can pretend they're right always about everything. And it's not going to end well for them any more than a heroin addiction is. But I don't like the effects it has on other people, which is also why I think it's great to be an absolutist in private. Just don't do it in public. So I'm fine with the absolutism I feel when I heave a heavy, passionate reveling in the slaughtering of the evil in a fictional movie, or in romance. If watching a romantic movie or falling in love, that was fun. I wake up most mornings still remembering, kind of revving on that joy. But it's a private thing. When you do it in public, it's a real problem. So that's why I'm so interested in off-jerking as a solution, and why I don't distinguish between versions of off-jerking other than that they be off. They've got to be offline. Confusing around offline. A lot of offline romanticism or self-romanticizing happens online. But what I mean by offline is don't do it in public. Don't do it. Don't try to take over the world with your romantic fantasy. That's absolutism. It'll kill you. And it's also why I get to neglect a whole lot of public policy, even though I have a master's in it from Berkeley, a whole lot about the political divisions and you know, I'm only focused on the absolutism. And I think I would be, well, I know I'm equally irreverent with liberal or leftist absolutism. And one way that absolutism plays out, that's been on my mind in recent weeks, you might have seen this, is absolutism often picks up some abstraction like love or kindness or niceness or empathy or something like that, or strength or loyalty or whatever. And it claims that, and the absolutist claims to be absolutely for it, like to the max. Like I figured out what matters in the world, the one thing that matters in the world, and it's loyalty or it's love or something like that. And because of that, I'm the top crusader for it, or non-judgmental, being tolerant, for example. You know, I'm all for tolerance, which means that I'm the king of tolerance, which means that if I don't like something you said, I can accuse you of intolerance. I can accuse you of being judgmental. I'll be the judge of who's judgmental. You see the problem with that? Because I do. That's where I'm focused. Okay. Learning from mistakes isn't an option for many. I had an interesting conversation with one of my coaching clients last night. We were talking about this. She said that it's liberating to get to a place where you. So this is a lawyer CPA in Dubai. Wonderful, charming, thoughtful, curious, and self-reflective person. And she'd got in touch because she wanted to talk about how she could get nicer. Hey, Azrael Crowley, good to see you here. And we had a conversation about it. We had a consulting conversation about it. And she was talking about it as freeing to be in a place where you can, let's see, I'm looking for Kwahu's words, learning from mistakes is fun. And she said it was freeing. And I questioned that. I said, not at first, at least. It's not at first. It's so for many people, it isn't an option. And part of that is because they've gotten way out into those infinite abstractions and coming back from them and actually looking at who you really are. That is, they've gotten deep into herobotic. It's too costly. So is it not an option? No, it's a possibility. It's just there's a big hump to get over if you're going to do that. If you're going to identify as learning, not learned. And so I did do a video about this a little bit about a couple of weeks ago about the undumbing of America, or the world, undumbing of the world. I can't remember which it was, but it's the one in which I'm talking about how the Dunning-Kruger effect is not as smart as it thinks it is, because it doesn't recognize that people don't want to think they're dumb. It simply assumes that they're too dumb, like we're machines that can't compute that we can't compute. And I'm saying, no, it's more than that. We don't want to, but there is something over the hump. And so this also relates to that thing about if you've bought, I ain't prying. That is, if you've decided you're not curious about this stuff, about learning more about what the actual fuck we are, starting from nothing but physics, no problem. Go live your life. There's a move in philosophy. A friend of mine gave it a philosopher friend, a guy from Duke University, gave it the name Mysterianism. It's the argument that we can't know what we are. And when I'm at a table with a Mysterianist, let's say at a conference, and we're trying to figure out what we actually are, and they say it's impossible to figure it out, I say, you're excused. You don't have to sit here. If you want to go do something else, go do something else. At this table, we're trying to figure out what the actual fuck we are. So let's see. So yeah, I'm suggesting that there's a hump you have to get over to be able to learn from your mistakes. And it's very easy once you've resisted that hump for a while. Then it becomes very difficult to look at yourself for the first time. It's a shock. Remember, in one of the recent videos, I said that introspection, to really understand what you are as a human being, is like waiting for a cancer biopsy. That is, you might discover a fatal flaw, and that would be terrifying. I really understand why it's no picnic to have an examined life. And so lazy thinking, you mentioned this here. No, I don't think people are lazy. What I think they are is efficient, economical. That is, if we see an easier way to get by, we will take it. And so in that sense, I'm deeply interested in microeconomics, studied it when I was doing my public policy degree, find it a very interesting approach to the dynamics of value. So changes in values. I think that their math is as close as we're going to get, as we've gotten so far to that. But if I find a cheaper, more efficient way to do things, I'm very likely to take it, which is also a major problem I have with the way that narcissism is treated. So notice that lazy is a moral term. It means they could do more and they're not. I do think there are people who should do more but don't. But that's my opinion about them. I wish that they would pay more attention to this or that. But I have to understand that life has always been habit accumulating. And what a habit is a freedom from having to think something through. So we've talked about this before, but the way I would distinguish it is there's all of life, it's habit accumulating. Then there's neuronal life, which can learn in real time, and you could call that habit accumulating. And then there's humans with language and therefore concepts, and we are habit jonesing. We need habits as quick as we can get them. We're living in a total clusterfuck. And so it's completely understandable to me that absolutists would exist. An absolutist is someone who has found a habit that's a habit to end all habits. If you get into the habit of not caring whether you're right and can just declare yourself right, it is so damn irresistible. I completely understand why there'd be absolutists of any stripe. You know, I do think they are doomed for our planet, just like if you don't want to deal with pain anymore, become a heroin addict. It's not a good long-term strategy. It doesn't end well, but damn, does it pay off in the short term? And the short-term priority for all of us is comfort in our own skin. So I totally get it. I understand it. But I don't want to get disdainful of it, because I actually think that limits my ability to understand what I'm dealing with absolutists. It's when you think about the pain that we deal with when we have to think things through, all the doubt, anxiety, ambivalence, ambiguity, and all the freedom you get from becoming an absolutist. It's a fucking no-brainer in both senses. Being a no-brainer is a no-brainer. It's what people would want to do. Completely makes sense. What do you get when you cross emotions or feelings with thoughts? You get thoughts that justify feeling good. That's what you would get. So I do see that as a human predicament. I am working against it, but no, I don't want to go moralizing like they should do better, or that it's easy to do better, that they shouldn't be lazy. No, it's easier. What they're doing is easier than what I'm proposing here, at least until you get over to the hump to where this shit is fun. I would not go back to it because I'm kind of addicted to this stuff now. And I don't think I think I was originally motivated to do this stuff because I was trying to do something very important in the world. I mean, I think a lot of it early on was ego, but this stuff has taken on a life of its own. Just like I took up the bass guitar at 16 years old so I could get women. because rock stars got women. I didn't recognize that bass players are considered mouth breathers and not likely to get women. And in my entire musical career, only one woman flirted with me because I played bass, but it took on a life of its own. Same thing happened here. So yeah, if in a way, this is why I'm a fisher of men and women, but it's all catch and release. If this stuff isn't interesting to you, I walk away. I mean, or I move on to those people who find it interesting. Okay, let me see where we are. I know that from experience, not that, oh, wait, see, let's see. It is difficult, especially if you face the suffering of someone that you are partly responsible for. Let me see what that's, let's see. I'm not sure what the it is here, but this has been on my mind too lately. So thank you for bringing it up, Melissa. You'll see lots of memes these days about standing up, speaking truth to power, being bold. This is a time for action and resistance. I don't think we factor in that what during World War II, I think, was called the Zippenhof strategy, which is if you do something that violates the government, they're not coming after you, they're coming after your family. And whether it's that or it's the mafia or anybody, that's a real problem. So there's another factor in my life. I am unencumbered. There is no one who depends on me now. My youngest child is 34 and self-financing and all of that. My kids are on their way. And I don't even have a dog or a houseplant. I am unencumbered. And part of that was me realizing this work is my priority. I'm having so much damn fun with it. It's so interesting how the ideas keep on coming that I didn't want to be encumbered anymore. And there was a time when I was always on the wrong side of every door. That it was when I was in partnership, I was restless. When I was single, I yearned for partnership. And then that faded out. And so what I'm saying, in a way, more broadly than my personal experience of it is, I don't just have to get along with myself. And I don't just have to get along with other people. I have to get along with reality. And there will be trade-offs. That is, there are things that we may not be able to do soon in the United States, not just for our sake, but for the sake of our children. Remember, I lived on a commune for 7 years, where it was a bunch of courageous but also lucky baby boomers who had the sense of freedom that they could go out and do this radical experiment. It was a really interesting, healthy experiment. How did it fail? These people all had kids. It was an age cohort coming through the 70s and early 80s, and they couldn't sacrifice on behalf of their kids. It's one thing to sacrifice for yourself to make a better world, but sooner or later we end up with these trade-offs. So that speaks to what Melissa's talking about. So in my case, the other aspect of it is that I never get lonely. And part of it is because I have these ideas to play with all the time. And part of it is that I had a good run. That is, I was not exiled from the world of encumbrances or partnerships or children. I had a good run. And if I hadn't had a good run, I probably would still be looking for one. And I do know a bunch of older folk who are. That is the change that people resist. Good. Okay, let me make sure I understand that. Okay, yes. And let me get back to your point here. I know that from experience. Yeah, okay, here's a connection. You've probably heard people say, I'm open-minded. People, I welcome all feedback. The video I put out this morning was basically me playing the character of someone who says, oh, I'm totally open to all feedback. If you found out that your car needs $3,000 worth of work, or your house foundation needs $10,000 of work, you wouldn't welcome that news. Yeah, I mean, because you got to pour all this money into it. Let's say it's changing the foundation of your house. You gotta repair the foundation. Then you deal for years afterwards with cracks in the wall and all sorts of consequences of having to change that thing. Don't buy the bullshit that anybody is really receptive to feedback in that sense. I mean, I've never seen anybody who takes news that they have to do some work on a habit as good news. I mean, they might take it in, they might say thank you, but they're also swallowing because it means a new cost. So this is once again that thing where I don't want to play the moralizer who says I'm exceptional for my receptivity. No, I'm a human being. Those things cost you. To find out that your habit needs changing, that's like having to change your foundation. Nobody would want to do that. I think it's better if we admit that it's costly. And then that also means that if someone resists feedback, it doesn't mean they're exceptionally bad, closed-minded, defensive. I understand that move because I know what it's like to get defensive. Because I know that it costs something to change things. Let's see. I watched American Commune the other day. It was bittersweet. American Commune, there's another movie that I like better. American Commune was made by the kids of a friend of mine, of some friends of mine from the commune. And I think that's the movie. And I found it distractingly autobiographical. I've seen this in a few children of. So Gregory Bateson's daughter, Nora Bateson, made a movie about Gregory Bateson. Gregory Bateson's an important thinker. But she didn't know what to do about all the content of his stuff. So it ended up becoming more autobiographical. There's a movie called 40 Years on the Farm or something like that. It's available for free online. And I find it a much more vivid portrayal of what we were doing there. Yes. So check that one out if you were interested in the farm. It was a fabulous experience. It was just what I needed. Okay, good. All right, let's see. Are the ideas really keeping me from being lonely, or you have folks in your life that are interested in those concepts that you can discuss with? Imagine learning all you have learned and having nobody. Beautiful point. Thank you for bringing that up. No, it would be hard to tell. I would, and I have research colleagues who are living in places that are barren of colleagues to jam with. I mean, there's no way I would be into these ideas if I hadn't encountered this extremely generous and unassuming research colleague who never pulled rank and never put me down and never made me qualify for something because I was curious. And the fact that he's local, that I could take a dog walk with him almost every morning. And the dog walks and we talk through the next steps in the theoretical work. And I remember the first time I sat with him, we had met at a conference. I had showed interest in his work. And then I asked him to be on my PhD committee. And he said, yeah. And then I went and met him on the Harvard campus where he had an office. He was a professor at Harvard. And I came out of it and I pinched myself. I felt so fucking lucky. And also so amazed that I could converse intelligently with a guy like that. I was overjoyed. So yeah, it'd be hard. And the other thing is that the excitement I felt at that time is a major challenge in this work. So imagine that imagine here, try this out. I'm driving to the airport after the New Orleans Jazz Festival. I'm in the car with an 18-year-old Uber driver, black guy. And we got talking about why he goes to church. And he was also aspiring to be a rapper. And he says, I go to church because it's the only time in the week when I can pay attention to the big picture, when I can step out and think about the big picture. So imagine this. You're a guy walking through life, burdened by all the encumbrances of your circumstances and whatever encumbrances you've taken on, anybody you're carrying, including your family, whatever. And then you discover that there are people talking about the big picture and you get really excited about it. And you feel like you almost feel like a genius because, or at least you're as impressed as I was that I could have this conversation with a Harvard neuroscientist and carry my weight, or at least not look like a complete fool. And so you get that excitement going to church, and then you get more excited and you get expansive and you realize, well, if I can take on this religion's idea, I can think about other versions. So you get into comparative religion, and it's so exciting because all of this stuff is generating for you this proud sense that you're actually able to handle the big picture. You know, theories that make you feel like a genius because they're talking big picture. And you get into Jordan, and you get into all the religious equivalents of Jordan Peterson and all the public intellectuals, Sam Harris, and all of that. And at some point, you're kind of overwhelmed by all of the theories, and it's like enough already. And then you pick one and you run with it. And what's nice about it is, let's say, if you're doing this in religion, is that you feel like a hero because you're championing the best religion or the best spirituality. And you also feel safe because there's no way to decide which theory is better than which. You know, when you think about revelation and supernaturalism, it's a wild card trump card. You can believe anything you want about what's going on in the supernatural. And if you look around the world, there's great variety. But it's fun to play in that marketplace and be a proselytizer for your religious theory. Okay, now, and you feel safe. And now apply that in the sciences. That's where I started out. I was very excited to have discovered that I was capable of thinking about the big picture. Then I got to where I was collecting them all the different versions of consciousness and all of that. And then at some point I realized I'm not, it's too much. I don't want to keep on finding yet another one. It's like, and then at that point, I got interested in how do you decide which one is better than which? I got over a different hump, it occurs to me, which was I was willing to put the theories up against the test of which is more real, which meant that I was no longer safe pitching whichever one I embraced intuitively. That is, whichever scientific or biophilosophical religion. Yeah. So at that point, I'm meeting a guy who's actually raising that question. Yes, and I am a very fortunate person. And I haven't noticed this before. If I'd been born a Jew 20 years earlier, I would have been a really unfortunate person. The Jews of my generation were about the most fortunate people in the world. And I think the same is sort of true of my personal life as well. I spent my first 40 years pretty fucked up, pretty anxious, pretty burdened by doubts, and pretty confident that I was not going to amount to nearly what I wanted to. And a few years back, I happened to find in my attic something I wrote 30 years ago, goals for some personal coach when I was feeling lost in a midlife crisis. I got them all. I got them all. If I die tomorrow, this was still one of the luckiest life. And I have to deal with that. And it's a weird thing. So try this out. I was buddy, speaking of luck, with the 2020 poet laureate for the United States. She was my neighbor across the street. I go over to visit her from time to time. She was 80 years old. No, not poet laureate. She was a 2020 Nobel Prize winner in literature, poet. And I asked her how she's doing. This is during COVID. And she says, I'm missing my friends and I am missing restaurants. And I said something about, I'm doing fine. I'm working on a book. I'm having a great time. And she said, oh, quit bragging. It's your worst trait. And which is fun to hear from a Nobel Prize winner. And we got into a discussion about it. And she admitted that actually she felt guilty for not counting her blessings more. She was a famously anxious person. She was always complaining. She had once actually done an intervention with me saying that I didn't complain enough. And I said, you got to understand, my life is cushy. If I had even the tiniest little piece of gravel in my sock, you'd find me as whiny as the next person, or more so, because I'm sometimes damn spoiled by it. So I got this issue about whether to disclose that I'm lucky or whether to not disclose it. If I disclose that I'm lucky, it sounds like gloating. If I don't disclose it, I'm putting other people at a disadvantage because other people didn't have the opportunities I had. So that's an interesting thing about advantage in an unfair world. Okay, the hero-splaining verse was really funny. Made me think you'd be a great stand-up comedian. Thank you. Thank you. I love hearing that. I want to suggest something around that. I'm changing subject completely. It's about playing dress up. I'm really into it. I don't mean physically. I wear the same shit over and over. But what I mean is I love adopting characters. It's a kind of real-time improv. I love to visit different people, try different people's natures on. And I want to do a video about it. I don't know if I know what I'm going to say in it yet, but I do think there's something about that where it's one of the humanizing things you can do. I play Jughead a lot. That is, I adopt a goofy, silly nature. It's one of the reasons I got in trouble with partners. My daughter once said to me, I've never heard you have a serious conversation with your partner. Um, and she was right. Why? Because I do silly. I do silly a lot. I go goofball a lot. And I know that's part of my character. So you could say this maybe is a little Jungian. I don't know. Playing the fool or coyote or whatever, but to actually put yourself in other people's shoes and act it out, I think is very useful. Johnny, hi. I have a Gurdjieff air about me. He's a blind spot. I have very little awareness of him. I mean, I know a little about him, but I need to know more. There's people I still need to know about. Okay. Yeah, so I encourage you to try that out. Try on being different people. I'd be grateful if that didn't happen to you. Oh, sorry. If only people also. Okay, the here's playing was very good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's fun. I get an idea and I get to produce a video, and however big my audience is, I get some interaction around it. I'll mention something related to that. I see two spirals. This relates to something that we were talking about earlier here. There's the word-wise spiral and the dumbass spiral. Let me explain what I mean by them. I got on a gravy train 30 years ago. I started having a bunch of ideas. I was having trouble spitting them out because my language wasn't that well developed. Remember, I had missed school from 7th to 9th grade, and did fine in school after that. But I hadn't put much time into it, and so I would grasp to try to find words to say something, and then I would put it out in the world. I started with limericks because I knew I didn't have much time or audience, and so I would try to encapsulate an idea in a limerick. Also, because it's easy to swallow. It's short and it's kind of cute. And I also engaged in what I called strategic gullibility, which is pretending I had an audience, and that they expected something from me. I didn't have an audience, but I put out stuff like I did. And little by little, my words became more developed in the way that they're developed. I'm not saying I don't know how good I am at it, but I never set out to be a writer. I didn't think I had that capacity, but I had ideas, and I was like the kid in the classroom who's raising their hand and really wants to get their idea across to anybody. And so there was a way in which the more I developed a capacity to express my ideas, the more ideas I could afford to have. So it was a word-wise spiral, and it involved interaction. I if you like the stuff I put out, please friend me on Facebook. I'm sorry, I'm old school. I wish I would get onto Instagram and all those things, but I'm Jeremy Unsure Sherman there. Um, I, whenever I have an idea, I capture it right away. I put it out as a bumper sticker size something on there. It often turns into a video or a blog article when I was doing that for Psychology Today. But I put stuff out, I get some interaction like I am here, and it continues to develop me up the word-wise spiral. Here's the reverse of that, the dumbass spiral. Dumbass is the only term I've found for being a jerk and being stupid. There's ignoramus, which is cute. I didn't come up with that. But other than that, I haven't found one that it combines the two, but they are combined. They build on each other. So if you're not keeping up with reality, you'll tend to become a jerk. You'll tend to declare yourself an absolutist, pretend you're always right, and jerk people around. And the more you jerk people around, the less you can afford to learn. That is, if I was to come across as an absolutist, if I had any actual doubts inside me, I wouldn't be able to pull it off. For me to be outraged like a Fox News person, I can't afford to have any doubts. Or like a Trump person, no, I can't afford to have any doubts. So there's also a dumbass death spiral. There's the more dumb you are, the more of an ass you'll become. The more of an ass you'll become, the more you'll have to be blind. And here you get to that fancy word, isotrophobia, fear of mirrors. You can't afford it. So this comes back to this question whether it's possible whether it's impossible or yeah. So low ambition, cynical, right? Yeah. So Michael, that's how I see it. That is low curiosity, low ambition, cynical, but so I've had to. One of the ways I think about it is, so I'm a romantic. I'm deeply romantic and deeply wary. I adore humankind, and I think that people are the worst, including me, for reasons that I can explain based on language. I mean, based on what you get when you cross a feeling organism with language. But so I'm romantic cynical, but I'm ironic in it, and there is a different version of it that I think is closer to what you're talking about here. It's a kind of a hypocritical romantic cynicism. You're an ironic romantic cynic knows the tension they're dealing with. That I have this dream of happily ever after, and it will not be met in my lifetime. Most fundamentally because my lifetime ends, not happily ever after. Everything I love will disappear. But a hypocritical one tried this out. If I meet a paradox, like be intolerant of intolerance, I got 3 basic moves. One is to ignore the paradoxical nature of it and just double down. Say, no, you should be intolerant of intolerance. So that's a kind of a fundamentalist hypocrisy because you're not recognizing that it's a paradox. Then there's the cynical hypocritical move, which is, see, it just proves that it's all bullshit. And so I'm happy to accuse people of being intolerant, but I don't believe it. It's not something I have to follow because it's bullshit, because it's paradoxical. And then the third move is the ironic one. So you notice that you'll often get those 2 first moves together. Trumpism would be an example of that. That is, they will scold you for being intolerant, but they think tolerance is bullshit. So that's the hypocritical, romantic, cynical move. Sorry, too many syllables. But there's also the ironic one. And that's where I live. And that's where my pantheon of artists live. They live in the tension between them and don't want to resolve to either side and will not be hypocritical about it. They're actually meditating on what, you could say, there's that Woody Allen line, life is nothing but suffering and pain, and not only that, it's too short. That kind of irony is what intrigues me. It's also why I had trouble with my Nobel Prize winning poet neighbor's poetry. It didn't quite have enough of that for me. I want I want some grit and humor in my poetry, in my art. That's where I gravitate. I'm not saying other people should be there. And I spent some time in India. I was doing consulting to Motorola, and I was looking around at all these people who were watching the incredibly saccharine Bollywood movies. And I was thinking, what wimps. And then it completely reversed. If I had their lives in Delhi, God, would I need romance? I would need it desperately. The only reason I don't need romance is that my life is actually cushy. So there's the thing. I'm not courageous. I'm safe. And once again, all of that. Okay, when do we fight back? What is going to be the thing that lights this fire? Johnny, I'm not sure there will be a thing that lights this fire. I mean, I'd like there to be one. So I like as a motivating question, there must be a way, but I also want to recognize that sometimes there isn't. So what will be the thing? What is going to be the thing that lights this fire? I'm going to talk about something that will light this fire, light the fire for a change from Trumpism that I think is dangerous. That would imagine that he craps out. We've been waiting for that for a long time, but he is 78. And not only that, this is rubber hitting road. That is, he's getting full freedom. So it's the fuck it all, find out situation that we're in right now. So maybe that will light the fire. But the question is what comes after it? Because throughout history, what comes after a movement crapping out is usually a counter movement that will also crap out. I mentioned this on Facebook, and have I advertised? Please join me on Facebook at Jeremy Sherman if you're interested in more of this. I called it the naivete paradox yesterday. The naivete it takes to galvanize a movement is the naivete that ultimately undermines it. I got to see that on the commune. You could never have gotten 1,400 people together if we weren't naive. But that also ends up undermining it. That is, any kind of woke in the broadest sense, I don't mean leftist woke, I mean I once was lost but now I'm found, ends up going for broke, gets broken, and becomes a joke. So what often follows one is another one. And I'm worried about that. That is, the sense, the way I think about it is that idealism focuses on the day of victory and the happily ever after and doesn't pay attention to the inevitable backlash that will come. And you just see this throughout the history of revolutions. For example, all these the Soviet ideologues, they get in power and they didn't expect the monarchs of Russia to come back, the white Russians to come back, same with the French Revolution. They just thought happily ever after. And Trumpists are definitely doing that. So my concern is what comes next. And I am going for a long shot fire, which I don't think is going to work, but I still think it's the only one we could afford at this point, is we have to admit to what we are, all of us. We have to stop grandstanding or brandstanding, which is grandstanding about your brand, your lifestyle brand, as if it's the solution. I think it's dangerous. When you look at, for example, Luther's revolution against the Catholic Church, Martin Luther's, the way it was just a rebranding of the same old bullshit. And I'm dealing with another problem that's on my mind these days, which is every time progressives come up with something that gains any traction, funded by nonprofits, grassroots, bake sales, things like that, the self-funding powers that be imitate it self-fundingly. They're not running on bake sales. And so if you look at the history of the movements that we get enthusiastic about in this country and what happens to them, the way they get trounced by copycat wealth. And I mean, Trump embodies all of the idealistic virtues that we have been claiming for progressives all along, and he's doing a better job of it. He's fucking up the world. But you name a virtue, he claims he's got it to infinity. And not only that, it's not about Trump, it's about this self-funding movement. So I don't know what to do about that. I wonder about it, but I don't think there's an obvious answer. And I don't think that people, so I am done with talk about transcendence. There's a sense that when the going gets tough, people wake up and they start to get real. That is not my sense of what humans do when the going gets tough. I wish it were the case. I don't see it in our history. And I'm trying to face our history, because if I don't face it, I'll just make those same mistakes again. So I'm trying to understand at the broadest level what could ever light the fire that wouldn't just be copied by them. And again, I don't run on hope. I run on curiosity and productivity. Because hope is a very unreliable fuel that tends to distort your interpretation of what's going on. So I do have progressive friends who, I mean, what I hate most as an emoji when I write something on Facebook, let's say, or elsewhere, is the cryy face emoji. I don't want to be there anymore. That's old. And it's also kind of indulgent at this point. It's basically me saying, the world doesn't meet my standards. And I don't want, it annoys me. I'll take a laugh over that. I'll take someone angry over that, though anger is another one. I think I don't think that stuff's going to light an effective fire. So when do we fight back? I am fighting back at a modest level. When do the Democrats or the parties that be fight back? That's a really interesting question. I find credible the argument that they're stunned deers in the headlights. I also buy the idea that there's a kind of what I call a hardening of the smarteries. That is, large organizations are places where dreams go to die. And so there's a possibility that they can't come up with something bold because they're too risk averse, which will never work against Trumpists, because Trump is running on nothing but this kind of psychopathic risk taking. And they're also totally drugged out on the risk taking. That is, I'm guessing that Elon Musk would wither and die if he didn't have threats all the time going on in his life. There's also an argument that it's best to stand back at this point and not light fires, because they let it burn strategy, which we talked about back in the 70s. We said, maybe the only way that people will come around is for things to get worse. But as I mentioned, there's a problem with that, which is as things get worse, people don't usually wake up to reality more. They get kind of idealistic. Okay. Want to win an A-class? We have to have the attitude. Okay. So Michael says the Republicans want to win at any cost. We have to have the attitude of winning at their cost. Okay, good. I didn't catch those last words of it. Yeah, it's interesting. This relates to a question that we'll take up, for example, tomorrow morning in the we have this study group in which we try to figure out how to engage effectively with Trumpists, since there's no talking to them. I'm on the fence about whether I got to make it cost them. I definitely want to make it cost them in the short run. Basically, what it comes down to is carrots and sticks. Can I lure a Trumpist away from their absolutism? Can I shame them away? And I don't want it to be revenge for, scornography, the pornography of scorn, the feel-goodness of, treating them like they're shits. I'm happy to use it as a strategy. I'm often calling them faggy pussies, because they are. I mean, it's so obvious that they're just scaredy brats, tantrumplicans. They're whiners. I will poke at them, and I check with my faggy friends about whether it's okay, and they say definitely go for it, Jeremy. But and I'm sure I've offended someone when I call them that, but I'm mostly trying to offend them. But I don't want it to be for the satisfaction of doing that. That's the fire I don't want to light. I want to find the human in there. And one of the things that's been interesting to me, this came up for me. I remember I was saying earlier, if you were here back then, that I was amazed that I could talk to a Harvard neuroscientist and carry my own. That feeling didn't last long. I got to a place among these research colleagues where I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, a feeling like I just didn't know enough, and that they were going to catch me sometime. And I got really surprisingly quick relief from it, from a strategy that I have used ever since in lots of situations, which is I imagine the worst case scenario, and then I come up with a way of finessing it to my, should it come to pass, what would I say to feel okay about myself? And if I had that as a kind of a life raft, if the worst thing happened, I could still work very hard to keep the worst from happening, but I felt more calm confidence, more calm competence. So the connection I'm making here is I think that it may be useful to offer up to Trumpists a way to save face by letting go, to actually draw a picture of what it could be like and how they would feel good about themselves, how they could stand corrected. Once again, inviting them to picture themselves as learning, not learned. And this would include, hey, everybody makes mistakes. I mean, I've made videos in which I describe the kind of naive idealism that motivated me to join the commune and drawn a parallel to Trumpism. We all been there. I did a country music song and I put it up on YouTube. I think it's probably still up there. It's not good. But the lyrics were the point, which was, it was basically that. It was basically, give up this lost cause, move on, and you'll find your life is better as a result. Something like that might be useful. Okay, I would consider having a Trumpist save face by a type of winning at their cost. It doesn't have to be in their face confrontational. Okay, winning at their cost. Yeah, so you're losing something and you're going to something else. I like this term from primatology, brachiation. It's when a primate lets go of one branch because there's another branch to grab onto. I also lucked out knowing very well Dan Ellsberg, who was an interesting case of this. We used to talk about it. So he's a guy who was famous for the Pentagon Papers. Before that, he had founded the field of behavioral economics with a pioneering paper he wrote as a Harvard economist. And he was an older guy living in Berkeley. He was friends with my parents. And after my parents died, I stayed good friends with him. We got together all the time. And we would discuss how he went from being a top nuclear planner with top secret clearance to becoming a peace activist, and he was the first big whistleblower. If you ask anybody, any historian, who's the biggest name in whistleblowing, it's Dan Ellsberg. And we would talk about how he made that transition. And we never quite resolved it. Now, I think part of it was that he witnessed, this is how he would tell it. He met Randy Keeler, who was an important peace activist at the time. He was a guy who was, for example, not paying his taxes and getting in all sorts of trouble. But an unassuming guy, I knew him too, Randy Keeler, from other circles, from my activist days. But he also met a lovely lass, his wife. And there was a way in which he brachiated. He recognized all the costs of what he was doing, as he was planning millions of deaths for Rand Corporation, for the Defense Department. But he also saw something more fun and truer. There aren't that many cases of people who make that transition. And he was fascinating to me this way. He said he would describe it as a change that didn't have to do with his psychology and his interpersonal life. But I think it must have been to some extent. I mean, his wife was gorgeous. This is a hippie peace activist woman who was beckoning to him at a time when he was beginning to think about it. So those kinds of moves, I have thought about. It would be wonderful if we had a movement called Hedonists for Social Responsibility, which were mostly attractive women who seduce men out of their bullshit. It's just a thought. I don't think it's going to happen. Vambo coming to the rescue. Yes, tell us what Vambo is, and also we got another 15 minutes. If I've missed something, because let me know. Look, the greatest fighters we've had in our nation's history, the oppressed, MLK, and the movement for equality is an example of how to fight this fear avoidance happening. MZ Knip, I'm right with you, and I also need to point this out. Martin Luther King was the inspiration for the moral majority Jerry Falwell movement. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You get a bake sale funded movement, and the self-funding powers that be copycat it and trump it. That's been going on a long time, and I still don't know what to do about it. I could analyze it more. Why does capitalism tend to have this runaway effect? It doesn't quite have this runaway effect in natural capitalism. Natural capitalism is cooperation and competition between animals for real goods, real valuables like food or territory. Human capitalism is symbolic. That is when you have an infinite thing like a moral virtue that you can imagine having infinitely, like infinite strength, infinite loyalty, infinite love, whatever. Yeah, those are going to have runaway effects because there's no limit on them. But I don't know yet what to do to change the system we're dealing with here, where whatever we come up with, if it works, it gets taken over and becomes a power play. I mean, Trump is punk rock for assholes. But that was in there in punk rock. There was a naivete, I would say, about the punk movement, which is let it all hang out, be rough and raw, and that will automatically be identified with our values. No, it won't. It's a rhetorical move. And once you've let the cat out of the bag, it's free use. Anybody can use it. And the Trumpists have beat us at the punk game. They beat us at the counterculture game. They beat us at every game we've tried. So while I can lionize the successes of the past, like MLK or Gandhi or something like that, I got to remember that stuff doesn't end up well. And not only that, there's a standard move that people make around MLK and Gandhi that's gotten us into lots of trouble. MLK and Gandhi did not believe that pacifism or passive resistance solved everything. It's in their notes. They didn't believe that. What they did is they believed that it would work in that situation. But what we tend to get is what I call insight overreach. Sorry. I don't know if you're talking to me, Kwahu. Yeah, of course I was alive during MLK. Where was I? I forget where I went. Responding here. I mean, I don't know where I went because I went elsewhere. Let's see. A group of people. Oh, it's this thing about pacifism. Insight overreach. Something works one time, and then insight overreach is, thank you, Melissa. I'm getting old. Thank you. You have an idea that works in one situation, and you think that it solves everything. So you could say that's what the Trumpists have done across the board, but it's not just them. I see it in the sciences all the time. But, natural selection doesn't explain everything. It explains something very important. Information theory, coming back full circle, doesn't explain everything. It explains something. And there's a way in which whenever we have a victory, we want to say, there, solved everything. And the Trumpists have gone all the way that way. So how to resist insight overreach? Yes, we can learn something from MLK and Gandhi. No, it doesn't solve everything. No, pacifism doesn't solve everything. I do note that passive resistance is a positive name for passive aggressiveness. And I think they both have their place, but they are strategies, they're rhetorical moves, they're power moves. We need them. But it's not like there's one that solves everything. This is why in the study group, the mantra I keep promoting is repertoire, not recipe. I don't think there's going to be a single fire lit. I know there are lots of people who want to say, hey, everybody, let's all on the count of three do this or that. That's a misunderstanding of how society works. I noticed it first around climate change, that there was a kind of it was amazing how many people were willing to dump on others to say, oh, that won't work as a strategy. As if everybody should do the one thing together. It's basically what I call if I were in charge of the world. Not interesting to me. We're dealing with a clusterfuck of people with different attitudes, appetites, opportunities, preferences, biases. It's not like we can galvanize a movement that suddenly does it the way they do in the movies. That's not how it works in real life. In movies, you get to write the ending before and build all the details up to it. That's not how it is in life. Okay, they have Estonian. I've been to Estonia. Let's see. I don't know what Vambo. I may miss the Vambo thing. Yeah, it would take me too long to figure that out. Okay, we have 9 more minutes. What have I completely screwed up here? What have I completely missed? What point are you having trouble getting through this thick head? Please let me know so we can deal with that in this last 10 minutes. We can't even get the Democratic Party to all move in one direction. That's right. And you end up with this, I will come back to this, related to this. I occasionally had partners who were romantic partners, female girlfriends, who would say, there's something wrong with this partnership. I feel like like I'm being constrained, like I'm being limited. There's things I would like to do that I don't feel like I can do in this relationship. I get that. That would be a reason to leave. But I cannot imagine a relationship between two people that doesn't have that quality. What do you expect? I mean, in any relationship, whether it be the Democratic Party or the larger organizations, you're going to have checks and balances, and checks are going to be constraints on what you do. You may talk as though the romantic vision is that you can do anything, that I can do anything I want with you. I'm totally free. You freed me. You set me free. That's not how they work long term. If they're checks and balances, no, you're not free to do anything. You can celebrate that you're free to do anything, but you better not mean it. What I love about my partnership is we can do anything. We can say anything, provided we don't. There's going to be constraints. And then the question is, okay, so how do you have a large organization that doesn't constrain, that isn't a place where dreams go to die? So I'll leave you with this question, which I'm going to dwell on. I haven't noticed it before. There are 2 ways to make a relationship or organization work. One is through checks and balances, which will tend to make dreams die, because you never get anything through the whole bureaucracy. And the other is tyranny, where everybody gets in line and follows the orders of one fucking maniac. Is there an alternative to that? I don't know. I'll think about it. Because neither of those are very useful. I do have this hunch, which is that there's no way that the Democratic Party will ever win again unless it starts to get front page news coverage every few hours. And there's no way to get that front page news coverage every hour if you're not doing something shocking. something that's outside the realm of everyday experience. We've talked about this before. Dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. It's got to be surprising for it to make it to the front page. And at present, the pedestrian quality of the Democratic Party is just torture. And it's double torture because we have great comedians, great shock jocks on the left. This last week, I read A History of Comedy in America. I'm fascinated by comedy as a tool, a really powerful tool. Court jester shit. Okay. That's right. Jeff Cheney. Yes. Good point. Yes. And also catch the movie You Hurt My Feelings. It's a new one that deals with we can talk or not talk. All of those tensions in a partnership, in a psychotherapy office, in a writing coach. It's fabulous. It's a good movie. So why is it that the Democratic Party hasn't brought in speechwriters like of the quality that you get on a show like Stephen Colbert? Because that stuff is exactly where I think we need to go. My long shot campaign is for us to get human. And for us to get human, we have to get self-effacing irony going. So they gloat about how their humor, the Trumpist humor, like Gutfeld, is all laughing at other people to feel good about themselves. The way to reach out to people would be humor that is basically the intimacy of everybody laughing at and with each other at the human condition. I consider that the highest possible form of communion for human beings. Stand-up comedy at its best is like that. Everybody laughing at themselves and at the comedian, and the comedian's laughing at himself, and everybody's laughing at the human predicament. And I think that would be an interesting way to light the fire. And I don't want to light the fire through moral outrage. Like we're going to out-moralize them. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, it could lead to another counter cult. It could lead to another woke broke joke of a movement. And I have all those liberal values. I haven't dropped any of my liberal values. I'm just trying to be strategic about it. Mortified. I'm gonna have to take a look at that one. People reading from their teenage diaries. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yes. So that's once again the ironic move where you notice, for example, that we are all dealing with how to be intolerant of intolerance, which for an ironist like me, what that means is when I find a paradoxical moral statement, and I have never found a moral statement that isn't paradoxical. You shouldn't be judgmental. Negativity is a no-no. Commit yourself to flexibility. Just all of them. If they're paradoxical, that means that you're dealing with a life-size tough judgment call. Tolerance is not the answer, it's the question. What should you tolerate? What should you not? Hate is what we say when we mean love is the answer. We're saying hate. That means to me that I have to decide what to hate and what not to hate, and I'll be doing that all my life long. Okay, so Kwahu, if you say there's no hope here, sadly, I don't go there. I'm not running on hope. I'm running on curiosity and productivity. And because I find hope to be an unreliable fuel, and I also find hopelessness to be its own version of romanticism. That is the self-romanticizing emo hope thing. I may have lost you, Kwahu. Good luck. But I encourage you to stick around, and it's okay. Like I say, if you've bought that there's no hope or that I don't have the answers immediately, bless the folk who come and go. That's all I can do. I'm inviting people to remain hopeful in the broadest possible sense. Like Obama said, it's not the end of the world till the end of the world. It's not game over. It's too far along. But if you're looking for quick answers, it's not going to the hardest questions in the world. I simply can afford more patience than that. And I think that's the point. I live in Tennessee. Melissa, hi. I feel like you always have a choice of how to feel about things. I choose hope. I don't. I'll flag this. It may be useful to feel I have always got a choice about how to feel about things. But once again, I'm just coming back to my attempts to be very accurate about it. I think that feelings are, and this comes full circle. I think that feelings are very convincing, and I don't think that I can just switch my feelings um, on a dime because it makes logical sense to. I can try to trick my mind into changing my feelings. One thing I say is I can't change myself, but I can usually change my circumstances so they change me. Yeah, it's not over, the fat lady sings. And yet, oddly enough, it is over. This was my hour and a half. I hate to wear out my welcome. And thank you guys for being here. Kwahu, come back if you get a second, wind. Yeah, yes. Great talk. Lots of good ideas. Thank you, Kyle. Nice to hear from you. Kyle writes me about my videos. I love that because I don't know how they're doing, and he thinks they're doing good. So he's my muse that way. As are these conversations. I will remind you of this, Kwahu, before we leave. Rudy Giuliani said, "What do I care about my legacy? I'll be dead." So I'll leave you with this paradox that I once put on a T-shirt: live each lifetime as if it's your last. It's not actually directly paradoxical, and I meant it in it's a tease, but it could be read two ways. One is, fuck it, I'll be dead in 2 years. What do I care about the future? What's the future ever done for me? Besides, I'll be gone. And the other version is, no, this is your one life. This is your one crack at making a difference in ways that you feel are important. And so as a result, live with that tension. That's the romantic, cynical tension. There we go. Thank you for being here. I'll be back next week for anybody who wants. And I'll be stuck with myself all week. Can you imagine that? See you guys.